You are the salt of the earth. You are the sea. And when you come to visit us, you are the estuary. Rumney Marsh, that's what our show is about today. My name's Dan Brielmann, and this is
playing guitar, writing songs, and what's that story about? What's that song about? Playing guitar, writing songs, and
there are very few salt marshes left, and we have one that is literally in our own backyard, and it's fighting a battle for its survival, as you will see. This very short walkway commemorates a once pristine salt marsh. This sign alludes to the many challenges this estuary has had and still faces. Egrets and cormorants come together along the shoreline, looking for something good to eat. The roads, the industries, and even landfills have played their part in the filling in of this disappearing Rumney Marsh. Just 5 miles north of Boston, there is a place for migrating birds, for fish to spawn, and for many forms of ocean life. Here along its eroding channels, a salt marsh struggles, sometimes called nurseries of the sea, and considered the world's most productive ecosystems. Today, Rumney Marsh stands at the crossroads, its fate determined by human beings. E-Awakening is a website my wife Marilyn and I started where we shine a spotlight on people, groups, and organizations that are doing positive things for the environment. Our guest today is Ed Reiner. He saw one of our stories and contacted us about Rumney Marsh, and he's been our friend ever since. Ed has been an environmentalist from way back, as you will see in this video. Biologist and wetland scientist Ed Reiner works for the federal government. In high school, Ed knew he wanted to be a champion for the environment, documenting Coney Island Creek. Today, Ed is a champion of Rumney Marsh.
Wetlands are good for the ecosystem, they're good for our fisheries, they're good for the shell fisheries, they're good for the birds, the wildlife. Certainly good for the people watching it as well. But this is an altered landscape, and this is something that can be restored.
Ed has spent most of his adult life caring for wetlands. Hi, Ed, and welcome to our show.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're really glad that you could be here. You know, why did you become a wetlands biologist focusing on salt marshes?
Well, when I grew up, I was watching the Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau, and I was thinking of becoming an oceanographer. I even studied French, but Jacques Cousteau didn't reply to my letter. And eventually, I just became a wetland scientist instead of an oceanographer. I liked it a little better.
Yeah, and I saw the picture of you with the gas mask and said, I don't want water that stinks. So apparently at a very young age, you knew that you had to be a reformer of the environment.
I started kayaking when I was 16 years old, and in Brooklyn, New York, Coney Island Creek was very polluted. So that's what got me interested in protecting the environment.
Well, Ed, we have another video of Rumney Marsh, and we're going to show that one right now. Here, close to home, is one of the most biologically significant salt marshes north of Boston. But since 1803, Rumney Marsh has experienced a 45% loss. Nearly half is now developed and filled in.
We can't really restore this marsh unless we restore salt water to it, because salt marshes need salt water. And restoring it as fresh water won't work because this plant thrives in fresh water. The problem with Phragmites is that it not only destroyed the ecology, and the fish and wildlife aren't here anymore. The marsh might be breeding a lot of mosquitoes because the fish aren't eating the mosquito larvae for the little areas of water that remain stagnant in the ditches in this environment. The other hazard is this stuff burns very readily, so it represents a significant fire hazard.
But Phragmites are just a symptom. One cause: here, a plate of steel covers a pipe where a bridge once spanned a tidal creek. This is flood protection, designed to keep water out of the marsh. But this one leaks, so a small portion of salt water is getting past, but not nearly enough to restore a salt marsh.
Salt marshes need salt water. Without the salt water, what you have happening here is Phragmites, common reed, the taller vegetation, has taken over the salt marsh plants that would have covered this entire area. So proper saltwater exchange is vital to the functioning of the salt marshes and for the fish and the wildlife that provide the whole food chain that we depend on with commercial fisheries.
Some people don't know about salt marshes and how important they are to ecosystems. Why are they so important?
Do you like to eat fish?
Yeah, I do, yes.
So I think the number is from 2/3 to maybe 3/4 of our commercial fisheries depend on salt marshes for part of their life stage, essential critical life stage. So the salt marshes are really the nurseries of the sea.
I was fortunate enough to work with you on the videos that we were doing about Rumney Marsh, and we're going to see another one of those right now.
All right.
The single most disruptive development to befall Rumney Marsh is what I'll call the highway to nowhere.
Between 1967 and 1969, 6 million cubic yards of fill material was brought in by truck and train to build a 2.4-mile long embankment.
This abandoned highway stretches the length of Rumney Marsh. Here, restrictions have completely cut off the flow of water, and it looks like a desert. The earth is dry and cracked. The removal of the I-95 embankment and fill, Ed Reiner stresses, is key to the restoration efforts.
This area that you're seeing lower was excavated for beach nourishment purposes in Winthrop, Massachusetts. So this was removed for beneficial purposes at Winthrop Beach, which is great. And the intent here is to restore this as a wetland if we could bring in salt water and restore it to a salt marsh the way it used to be.
Ed, tell us about this road construction, this highway to nowhere. Can the salt marsh be restored to the way it used to be?
Definitely, of course it can. This abandoned highway, it's nowhere else do we have an opportunity like this in Massachusetts where you could remove a piece of real estate and restore an aquatic environment. You know, everywhere else real estate is valuable, right? Out here, this highway to nowhere, when it was stopped in 1972 by Governor Sargent, the newspapers in the Globe said, highway project stopped, fill might be removed, marsh restored. So I've been working on that ever since. And this has been 50 years since the highway went in.
And you've been working on this for a good amount of time.
For my whole career. You know, when this marsh was designated an area of critical environmental concern in 1988 by the Secretary of Environmental Affairs, James Hoyt. And in the designation of this important area, he specifically mentioned the goal for the removal of this abandoned highway. So it's been planned for that it should be removed. And now it's just a question of doing it.
Can we describe where this highway to nowhere is?
Well, I-95 was going to go through Boston, but it didn't. Governor Sargent stopped the project in 1972 because the National Environmental Policy Act came into play. There was a need to reassess what this highway would do to the social economic environment. There was going to be parkland impacts. So the project never was completed. But so as you might know, I-95 doesn't go through Boston. You have to take the 128 loop, sort of, right? So it's very confusing. But I-95 bypassed Boston, and this project was never constructed and never will be. So we just have a damaged salt marsh that can be restored.
A damaged salt marsh that can be restored that has this huge amount of sand and fill in there, and that cuts off the Pine River flow, as I understand it, and that causes drainage issues. We're going to see a video about that right now.
A cliff created by the abandoned highway project erodes into this man-made channel. It is here where the meandering Pines River came through, and it is here that Ed Reiner would like to see it flow once again. For now, the salt water is blocked. A single entry is through this rock-armored channel that would have been spanned by a bridge. But where there is limited flow in, there is also limited flow out.
This estuary won't be able to drain fully during the time that in between a storm that the tides drop lower. So the water levels get higher and higher. And this restriction ends up then causing a worse flood because the duration is prolonged, because the water then takes time to get out.
When the railroad was built, the marsh drained, and in turn created the development of homes, which are built in the floodplain. Normally, a marsh acts as a buffer, protecting people and property. The peat, made up of thousands of years of decaying plants, acts as a sponge, absorbing water. So it's not surprising that homes built in a marshland would flood.
Now, the Pine River flow, it's really important for estuary drainage. Can you tell us why?
Well, basically we have 9 to 12-foot tides in Boston. It varies depending on the stage of the moon, whether it's 9.5 or as much as 12 feet of difference between low tide and high tide. For the Pines River, there's very little freshwater flow really in the river, but you have this 9.5 or 12 feet of tide that every day, twice a day, moves into this estuary. And it has to cross this barrier of this 2.4 mile long highway to nowhere, which affects the flow. So, and this is very unusual that in Rumney Marsh, the flow has to pass through 3 consecutive tidal restrictions before the water ever breaks the plane of the high marsh. Marsh, basically, when you look at it, only in the highest tides is it going to be flooded. Normally tides don't flood the complete marsh, but in the Rumney Marsh, the water has to pass through 3 restrictions: a railroad bridge, a highway bridge, and this highway to nowhere without a bridge.
To get the salt water into the marsh, but then also to get the salt water out of the marsh because there's so many homes built in there.
That's right. Water has to get out, and it has to go through the same restriction on its way out. So really, tidal restrictions aren't good for anybody because they delay drainage and impact the ecology of the marsh.
Right, tidal restrictions meaning these railroad embankments and all the things that are stopping the flow of the water into the marsh.
That's right.
Now we have a video that shows us some of the advanced technology that helps to restore the flow.
Let's watch it.
That. Yeah.
There is advanced technology which can help restore salt water flow. This is a self-regulating tide gate, which allows salt water to flow in as well as out. Here is an example of what saltwater flow can do. You can see the marsh is healthy on this side, where the salt water is flowing. But where it is stopped by this blocked culvert, the other side is invaded with Phragmites.
Ed, is this technology something that would work for Rumney Marsh?
Well, clearly the self-regulating tide gates is a great invention, but in I think we have 9 or 10 of them in Rumney Marsh now, but they haven't been operated according to the instructions of the manufacturer. So while the technology exists that we could control tidal water where necessary, where the homes have been built in low-lying areas and where there's culverts that need this kind of tide gate, the fact is they haven't been operated properly by the state government, Department of Transportation, Department of Conservation and Recreation, or the City of Revere for that matter. So nobody really operates the tide gates properly.
Well, I know, Ed, you've had some success in restoring parts of the Rumney Marsh salt marsh, and we're going to watch a video about that right now.
Balancing the needs of flood protection and the restoration of this marsh is a conversation that needs to happen. In the meantime, there are successes. This area where a portion of the abandoned highway fill has been removed shows the natural beauty of a restored salt marsh wetland.
And this was all highway fill at a height higher than what we're at originally. And it was removed, and 19 acres of wetlands came back just with nature restoring it by itself after the proper grading.
At the end of a very short walk along this embankment is a clam flat. The grasses begin to grow, and pickleweed spreads.
Well, Ed, I know you've spent so many years of your life working to restore Rumney Marsh. That's been a passion of yours. It must feel really good to have something like this happen.
Well, we're not done yet. We've only succeeded in restoring a little bit of it and removing some sections of this highway, but we haven't restored the flow across the barrier, so there's more work to be done.
Yeah, I know, because some people could get real pessimistic and say, how are you going to save a salt marsh like this? Look at all this stuff that's around it. You know, it's been there for so many years. But you still have a lot of optimism for saving Rumney Marsh.
Well, Rumney Marsh is a really important place. It's the largest salt marsh closest to Boston. So for a lot of Boston inhabitants, this is a place to visit. You know, it has a lot of wildlife. People need open space. It's and flood protection. If we developed it, everybody would be flooded.
Yeah, I know. And you were talking a little bit about the importance of salt marsh estuaries. That they're the nurseries of the sea. I mean, there's so many things about a saltwater marsh that are important to us as humans, and also to all the other life that is out there.
Well, you know, if you come there for one of the birding days, for instance, and see the tremendous amount of wildlife that visits the area, you'd gain an appreciation of it as well.
Right. And Ed, we have one more video that we'd like to show, and we're going to play that one right now.
Unfortunately, the happy ending for Rumney Marsh seems a long way off, as Ed Reiner shows us what is leaching into the sea from a dump.
And it's been eroding for a long time with refuse coming out of the bank that was formerly salt marsh here. There's 9 acres of upland fill here, which is all a garbage dump.
There are many man-made threats to this marsh, and perhaps one of the worst is what is alluded to on this sign along this very short public walkway. And I quote, "During the middle of the 20th century, the coastal wetlands marshes were considered marginal wastelands and were encroached upon and used for solid waste dumps, junkyards, and various commercial uses to the detriment of this great natural resource. Perhaps the only thing that will save this marsh is an awakening of public consciousness, community involvement, and more champions like Ed Reiner."
Ed, as you remember, these video clips were shot back in 2016. What's been happening since then?
Well, a lot of vegetation popped up in the two newest excavation areas that were shown in the video, so it's greening up, and that's a good thing. But we haven't done any further fill removals yet.
Okay. Now, you had a couple of maps, EPA maps.
In the middle of it is this green and yellow area which represents the highway to nowhere. So that's the barrier that is affecting tidal flow into the Pines River. The red areas shown on this map are areas behind tide gates. So, and this is where we talked about the self-regulating tide gate. So some of these locations have these special tide gates which are supposed to control tidal flow consistent with flood protection. And these are the places, unfortunately, where they're not being operated properly. And the red zones are showing basically where there's an invasive species dominates the environment because we don't have enough tidal flow to control the nuisance vegetation, the Phragmites,
Right.
with salt water.
To get the salt into the marsh. I just have one last question for you, Ed. How can viewers get involved in helping to restore or save salt marshes?
There's actually a Saugus River Watershed Council group. There used to be a Friends of Rumney Marsh group. There's lots of other salt marshes that also have needs for people to help out. There's the Herring River in Wellfleet, Massachusetts, is the largest potential restoration of salt marsh in Massachusetts by removing of a dike that was put in 1909. There's the Friends of Ellisville Harbor, or Ellisville Marsh, I should call it. They've been involved with restoring a marsh in Plymouth called Ellisville Marsh. So there's lots of places and lots of people concerned about marshes. The Great Marsh, north of Rumney Marsh, is the largest Massachusetts marsh. And a lot of people are involved with working on restoration efforts out there as well. So just get involved locally with wherever you live.
Ed, I want to thank you for all the research and the work you've been doing to help restore Rumney Marsh. I want to thank you for doing the videos with me. It was a lot of fun.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for having me. It's been great working with you to do the videos. This area was excavated about four or so acres to create a new salt marsh and intertidal mudflat. What you could see is plantings. They planted two types of plants, Spartina alterniflora, which is salt marsh cordgrass, and Spartina patens, which is salt meadowgrass. There's also been a lot of natural vegetation that's coming in on its own. Salicornia is a bushier, small green plant that's filling in on the marsh.
I'd like to thank the crew because without them we wouldn't be here. Justin Shanahan, Billy Davis, Tracy Crean, and Marilyn Brielmann. And I also want to say hi to Aaron Connor and Kathy Welch, and we're looking forward to seeing you at the next show. If you'd like to see the Rumney Marsh video in its entirety, it's on our website at e-awakening.com. And now I want to close with a theme song that I wrote for Rumney Marsh. It's called Salt of the Earth. You are the salt of the earth. You are the sea. And when you come to visit us, you are the estuary. In other words, we call you marsh, wetlands, and tidal pools. And when we come to visit you, we we hope that you are here. 'Cause we don't know what we've got till it's gone. And that's so long. And if we could go back in time, would we do things differently?
At e-awakening.com, we do stories about the environment because we believe that the environment is the #1 most important story of this century. It's a story that will affect far more people than any other story. Not just the people alive today, but people being born into this world and all the other life that we share this earth with. At e-awakening.com, we produce stories about the environment because we believe that the more people see stories about the environment, the more people will care for the environment. I'm Dan Brielmann for e-awakening.com.
Cable TV is democracy in action. The voices of our local community. The stories that matter to us. Support your local cable television channels and watch us grow. Playing guitar, writing songs, and is produced by e-awakening.com in association with Abington Cam's Community Access and Media Incorporated.
What's that story about?